If you look at pictures from these Middle Eastern nations, you will be amazed. If you look at a 1920s picture, you'll think you're looking at Europe.
There feels like a sense of a warning that you're giving the West about Islam, that we're not taking it seriously enough.
Most of what we call the Muslim world, which again, North Africa, the Middle East, but all into Asia, the vast majority of that land was taken by conquest. So now you fast forward to today, and your average Westerner, European has no idea about this. You have to understand who and what you're bringing in. Who's the enemy? Everyone who's not a Muslim. Okay, are there Christians who are nominal Christians who want to engage in violence? And yeah, of course.
Can Islam have an enlightenment and truly reform itself?
You or Sam Harris, Muslims don't care what you think.
If you had to put forward a thesis about how the West should think about Islam, what would it be?
The thesis would be that Islam is not just another religion. It's an entire coherent political system. A lot of people are approaching Sharia, which is usually loosely translated as Islamic law, and they have no problem condemning it. A lot of Americans, Greg Abbott, Trump, Abbott said like there's no room for Sharia in Texas, for example. Mm-hmm. And that's all well and good, but I think as people start learning, well, guess what? Sharia and Islam are inherently the same. I call one Islam the descriptive name of the religion, and Sharia is the prescriptive application. So I guess that would be my ultimate thesis, which is, maybe you see what Sharia is, maybe you don't like it, maybe you find it incompatible with the West, but guess what? That's not just some weird accretion that some radicals do. That is Islam.
All right. So when I'm reading the stuff you write, when I hear you talk on the internet, there feels like a sense of a warning that you're giving the West about Islam, that we're not taking it seriously enough, something along those lines. Does that feel fair?
From the very beginning of Islam in the 7th century, after Muhammad dies and Arabia is consolidated under the banner of Islam, they go on the jihad, according to Islamic teaching. And in 1 century, from the death of Muhammad, 632 to 732, they literally have conquered 3/4 of the Christian world, which most people have no idea about, okay? When people hear of countries like Egypt and Syria or Turkey, they just have in their mind this vague idea that they were always either Muslim or kind of Eastern. Yeah. No, they were actually, if you went in the 7th century, Christianity was more ingrained in Egypt, in Turkey, in Syria, in Morocco, Mauritania, and in Tunisia. The father of Western theology, Augustine, he's from Tunisia. He's a North African. He was a Berber. Okay, and most of the early fathers were Egyptians and Syrians and so forth. And you had 5 sees, 5 major centers. One was Rome. The other 4, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and Constantinople, all got conquered by Islam. So it was a long, constant war that went on literally for over a millennium, okay, century after century, whenever Muslims could. Obviously, there were times when it was an ebb and flow, and due to the vicissitudes of circumstances and Muslims weren't strong enough, they wouldn't attack. But any such time that they were strong, they conquered. So I just told you, I gave you the date 732, 1 century, because that's the Battle of Tours, and that's where Islam has finally stopped in the center of France. Spain has now been conquered. All of North Africa has been conquered. The greater Middle East has been conquered. And then later, Turkey gets conquered, which is one of the most ancient Christian regions. That's where St. Paul sent many of his letters. It features in the book of Revelation. There was a long, constant war and annexation of Christian territories by Islam, historically, just as a fact. And why did they do it? So even if you find a historian who is willing to talk about this, they'll give them their national names, okay? They'll talk about the Arab conquest. They'll talk about the Moors in Spain. They'll talk about the Turks, and they'll talk about the Tatars and the Mongols. They'll call them Saracens. And when you hear it that way, as I did in college, you're prone to just think, okay, these are different warring groups, just like in Europe. The French and the English are warring. There's no ideological component necessarily. But if you dig into the sources, as I have, the primary sources, including from the Muslim sources, they see themselves not necessarily as Turks or Arabs, but as Muslims, first and foremost. And their rationale for war on whoever, let's say the Christians, is you're an infidel. And, that's the rule of Islam. And we have to attack you and give you the 3 choices: convert, die, or pay tribute and be a second-class citizen, et cetera, et cetera. So my point is, it was a long, constant, massive war that went on that swallowed up most of the Christian West. Okay. We call it the West because it's west of what? Well, West it was, when we think of the West, now it has its own kind of connotation. But historically, in the medieval era, it was West because it was the westernmost portion of Christianity that didn't get conquered. Okay, it was the final appendage, Europe. And there was a constant warfare, constant struggle that went on. Islamic pirates would go as far as Iceland in the 16th century for raids, and they would come back with loads of slaves. America's first war, most people are unaware, as a nation following independence from Britain, was with Muslims, who were again using the same logic. And it's interesting because it comes out in the writings of Thomas Jefferson, this paragon of enlightenment, who had, of course, obviously forgotten about those Muslims and didn't really understand what was going on. But they were enslaving American sailors in their vessels. They would raid them, Muslim pirates from Barbary. And John Adams and Jefferson met with one of the ambassadors from Barbary. And basically, and we have the existing letter where Jefferson wrote a letter to Congress saying what happened in the meeting. And he says, we told him, look, can't we just be friends? We have nothing against you. You can do your religion, and let's engage in trade. Let's help each other. And then Jefferson writes, and the man answered us and said, it's in our Quran. You're the enemy. You're the infidel. We must wage war on you, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So I tell you all that by way to answer your question about the warning. Okay, so this has been going on for over a millennium.
This being, we are ideologically driven. We are going to wage warfare to conquer the infidel.
Right, and we have conquered. Most of what we call the Muslim world, which again, North Africa, the Middle East, but all into Asia, okay, and in sub-Saharan Africa, the vast majority of that land was taken by conquest. So I mentioned what was taken from Christians. Iran was the Zoroastrian great civilization that was conquered. Pakistan, okay, which is land of the pure. Well, those are just Hindus who finally were conquered and converted to Islam. Okay, even in Indonesia, there's this sort of story about it didn't spread through violence. There was actually a lot of coercion once Muslims grew in numbers. So that's the warning. So now you fast forward to today. And your average Westerner, European, has no idea about this. What they know is colonialism and evil Europeans. And now we're going to make it up for them. I mean, that's the logic in the UK, for example. That's why it's flooded with Pakistanis, because we're making up for our sins in colonizing their lands, and we're bringing them here. That kind of logic.
And to you, that's patently ridiculous.
It's patently ridiculous because, you have to understand who and what you're bringing in. And so now you've brought in, let's say, the UK and the really big ones, UK, Germany, and France, but also Sweden, and the numbers of Muslims are growing in Italy. Spain just gave a blanket acceptance of like 1 million migrants, which is kind of insane. Spain went through 800 years of war to evict Muslims, okay, the Reconquista, literally, because they couldn't get along. And now they're bringing him. So it just shows you the massive disconnect between the Western world with its history and the Muslim world, like I said, is continuity. So, okay, when Muslims come to Europe, so just to explain to you some ideas, according to Islamic rule, Islamic law, Sharia, Muslims are forbidden from voluntarily migrating to live under non-Muslim rule, infidel rule. You have to live in the lands of Sharia, where Islam dominates. Okay, why would you go live with the enemy? Because the non-Muslim.
That's stated.
That's stated.
Okay.
But now there's caveats. Okay, which I'll get to. So but that is the normal state of affairs. They're the enemy. We're the Muslims. The Quran is full of this whole doctrine, which it's in Arabic, it's called al-wala wal-bara, which means Muslims must only help, befriend, side with, and be loyal to Muslims of the Ummah. Well, Ummah basically means the supranational Islamic community that transcends race, language, ethnicity, and geography. And they must have hatred for the non-Muslim. And whenever they can, they must wage war and try to subjugate them. Okay, that is a legit doctrine straight out of the Quran. I've written a lot about it. I can give you some verses if you want. But so that's the driving doctrine that propelled the historic jihad. It still exists. Muslims still think this way. So then you bring masses of them into Europe. I mentioned the main countries, England or UK and whatnot. And if you look there, there's a lot of problems. Okay, I mean, nobody's going to argue that. If you want to be honest, of course, there's certain people want to put their head in the sand and say, no, everything's fine. But no, there's massive problems. You probably heard of this Restore Britain new party that came out. I mean, there's a reason why people And if you hear the words of what he's saying, I think his last name is Lowe. It's on the one hand, it's refreshing because it's basically what everyone there is thinking. On the other hand, it's like, you would have imagined someone talking that way a decade ago. But why is he? Because it's a reflection.
Let me plant a flag for people. So some people that are watching this right now, their base assumption is going to be Rupert Lowe is a wild bigot. You are giving this because you've got some axe to grind around bigotry, and we'll get to growing up as an Egyptian Christian and what that means and all of that. But I wanted to get all of that out on the table so that people understand what the sort of core thesis is, what you're worried about, that there's all this historical continuity. Muslims are driven by a core doctrine. That core doctrine says that you should be going in and conquering based on the religious doctrine. We've got people now going into these countries, call it immigration through conquest. You didn't say that, but I know your work. I'm familiar enough that I know that that's a thing on the table. Okay, now I want to back up and I want to walk through what the foundational beliefs are that you have that lead you to that, because I want the people watching this to be able to draw a well-informed conclusion as to whether this is just bigotry or whether there really is a reason to be concerned about this. So how did you grow up? Your parents are immigrants from Egypt, but they're not Muslim. So give me that background, what that was like, and most importantly, how it informs your views.
Okay. So correct, I was born here. My parents immigrated from Egypt. They're what's called Coptic Christians, okay? And the word Coptic is basically a corruption of the Greek word Aegyptos, which is where we get our English Egyptian. It's Aegyptos. And so when the Arabs invaded and they met the Aegyptos, they just called them Gypt. They dropped the first and last syllables, and Gypt eventually found its way to us as Copt, okay? So, but now it means, the indigenous inhabitants of Egypt pre-Islam who still exist in minorities and are Christians, because like I was telling you, those countries were still Christian when the Arabs invaded them. Egypt was conquered around 641 AD. Okay, so now here's the thing, and I know where you're going with this because people have said this to me before, which is, it's because you're a Christian and you feel like Muslims took over your country and you have an axe to grind. And I've heard that before. Now, here's the truth that most people don't understand. And if you find an Egyptian or a Copt from Egypt, most of them are going to tell you, which is actually a lot of Coptic Christians don't even like what I'm saying and would not agree with me. And they'll tell you, oh, my friends are all Muslims. You're a hate monger. What are you doing? And I would actually argue my parents would have been at least neutral. They weren't like, oh, we love Muslims, but they wouldn't have said, oh yeah, Muslims are all monsters or evil. So I can honestly say that the only thing that my own personal background might have done is it drew interest in the question in the first place. My main interest is history. I studied history. That's what I majored in history. And so it was natural, of course, for me to gravitate to those topics that are part of who I am. Okay, so I'm a Copt, I'm Christian, Muslims, so that's why my first thesis was, for example, about the first military conflict between Muslims and Christians, because I was involved in military history at the time. So I don't think that, my if anything, my background, if you really dig into it, and, there's this theory that, every Christian from the Islamic world hates Muslims and they're being persecuted. And that's not even true. I mean, that's one of the topics I'm expert in. I have another book on the persecution of Christians, and we could talk about that. But most Christians would actually, because it's a cultural thing, a lot of Christians from the Middle East are culturally like Muslims. So if you put an American Christian and a Coptic Christian and an Egyptian Muslim, the Coptic Christian and the Muslims are going to be best friends because culturally they see things eye to eye. So I tell you all this, okay, so you understand that, no, that's not in any way, Christians are not born and bred with this, those Muslims, we can't wait till we get away from them. Okay, now, obviously, there's some who did experience persecution in the modern era, and it's getting worse now. But let's say in my parents' day, it wasn't that bad at all. The Muslims were let's say my parents were born in the 40s, so they're growing up in the 60s. Muslims in Egypt at that time were nowhere near as radical as today. And even today, a lot of them are not radical. So Again, I'm just telling you all this just to tell you that is, if anything, that should have moderated my views that I am.
We'll be back to the show in a second, but right now I want to talk about a lie the wireless carrier industry is selling you. Most privacy-focused carriers aren't actually private. They're just rebranded versions of AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. The same companies that are actively selling your data and getting breached every few months. Cape is different. They own and operate their own mobile core, the central command center that controls your account, your data, what gets collected, and who has access to it. That means SIM swap protection that's cryptographic. Your number is tied to a 24-word phrase. No one, not even Cape, can transfer your number without it. Cape is the only privacy carrier in the country that owns its own mobile core. No one else provides this level of control. Head to cape.co/impact and use code IMPACT to get 33% off your first 6 months with Cape. And now, let's get back to the show. If we know that Muslims and Christians can live side by side and not end up having animosity towards each other, how is that consistent with your view that there's this pattern that repeats through history, and so it's just sort of inevitable, and if you're not careful, it's going to happen again? Because that tells me, at least for one period, everybody was fine living together.
My ultimate point is the religion of Islam, as it is understood, written down, documented, black and white in the Quran, codified by the ulama or the clerics, okay, is an intolerant and violent creed that is incompatible with the West. That's my message, okay? Now, what happens inevitably, and we're having it right now, and I'm glad we are because it's important, is all of a sudden now we conflate the religion with the people, okay? And with every religion, Christianity, Judaism, whatever, you have teachings, and then you have people who are to varying degrees associated with the teaching, okay? We can look at Judaism, right? You have the actual Orthodox Jews, and then you have, I think they're called the Reformed or liberal Jews, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, but they're all Jews, right? And even I think they're called Reformed Jews, who are like liberal Jews, they'll tell you, well, I believe this, but the Orthodox believe something else, okay? So, but as it happens, the Orthodox, I'm sure, are much closer to Judaism. And as it happens, the radicals...
As written, you mean?
As written, yeah. Right. They're being more consistent. They're being more loyal or adherent to the actual text and the traditions and the history. Now, the same thing with Islam. So as I described to you, Islam, it is what it is. It's violent. It's intolerant. It's not out to live in coexistence. It's just out to become supreme, all right? Now, the Muslims within Islam, what are they, almost 2 billion people? You're going to have some who think that's great and who love it and who want to activate it and who want to be part of that. You're going to find some who don't even know about it, who don't care, just like the many nominal Christians in the West who say, I'm a Christian, but what do they even know about Christianity, right? So you're going to have Muslims like that. You're going to have Muslims who even know what's that there's bad stuff, but they're not going to live with it. They're going to know there's going to be Muslims who know the bad stuff and they agree to it, but they're not going to commit to it, not yet, because it's the situation is not opportune. So I guess my point is I've going back to my background and all that. I've objectively studied Islam, and I know the languages, the original languages. It's been my academic background. I've written books, and what I'm telling you is not coming from I'm a bitter Copt with an axe to grind. It's coming, if anything, that should have tempered me. Most of the Copts I know actually don't like what I'm doing. You're being a troublemaker. People live in peace. Okay, so to go back to that, well, are they living in peace or not? Well, who's doing what? Some Christians in Egypt and in Middle Eastern countries get persecuted. Some get killed. Some have Muslim neighbors who they get along with.
What will help us is to break these down into some chunks. So the first thing is what I'm hearing you say, like any religion, some people are way into it, some aren't.
Right.
Hiding in there is a belief then that even if you have the vast majority that are, call them secularized, they're not super by the book, it doesn't take a large number of people that are Orthodox. I don't think Muslims use that word, but that idea, very strict by the book. to create a problem.
Right.
And the ideology that's hiding in the more hard-lined orthodox, we'd say radical, but I want to stay away from that kind of language, that they're really tied to the word of the Quran, the hadith, the interpretations. You'll have to walk us through that. But so for now, I'll ask the audience to accept that you have a core belief that says it does not require a large number of people to be a problem for there to be a problem. So you've been very clear about separating the people from the religion. So now walk us through you've said a bunch of them, but like sort of in passing, going quickly. Walk me through what is the doctrine of Islam that becomes problematic for a hardliner who's like, but it says right here to do this thing.
Okay. There are actually three. The first one I touched on is, the second one I'll mention briefly because it's the most popular, which is jihad. Okay, that is a doctrine. It's okay, which is, there's Quranic verses. It's the life of Muhammad. It's the example of the caliphates. It's the example of the sultanates, whether they're Arabs or Turks.
What is it? So people will have heard the word, but what is
jihad?
It actually? Yeah.
Okay, so it's very interesting, actually. Jihad, the old Orientalists, the original translators, Europeans, they would translate it as holy war. And that's fair, because when you come across a foreign word, you can either give it its most literal meaning, or you want to give it the connotation that the Arab mind hears. And holy war is exactly what it would mean. All right. Now, what's funny, and what it is, what it was historically, is Muslims are obligated to engage in holy war, which is not just war, it's divine. Allah's behind you. If you die, you reach the highest levels of paradise. So that's why it's holy. And who's the enemy? Everyone who's not a Muslim. Because we have to control their lands and we have to rule them. All right.
Is it ever expressly said why? Like, why do we have to control, invade, conquer?
I'll answer it this way. Let's go to the first really problematic doctrine. Okay. So jihad is the manifestation of what I'm going to talk about now. The first, which I would call the first premise doctrine, which I've touched on and will answer your question. And it's the one in Arabic. It's called al-wala wal-bara, and it's based on numerous verses in the Quran. And it's basically
And sorry, really fast. I think people should know you speak Arabic as a first language.
I was born here, so I don't know. I'm bilingual.
In the house, you spoke
Arabic with my parents.
So you are fluent.
Yeah.
So you're reading direct sources.
Yes,
You've read the
Quran,
Quran in Arabic.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Just making sure people know that.
Yeah. Okay. So this doctrine, which is unwavering. I even, with Chat GPT and AI, which I think tend to be politically correct, I put them on a spot and I asked them about this doctrine. And they're like, yeah, this is a legit doctrine.
What's the doctrine exactly?
So it's called al-wala wal-bara in Arabic, and it can be translated, it's like a dichotomy. It could be, I used to translate it as loyalty and enmity. And a lot of Muslims I've seen,
loyalty, enmity is what, love or hate? I actually don't know.
Well, so a lot of Muslims simplify it by translating it as love and hate.
Okay.
I used to go with loyalty and enmity. You can translate those words in different ways. So what that means, to befriend, to be allied to love, to help. But as the opposite, it's to disavow, have nothing to do with, and hate, okay? And you're supposed to have the former, the alliance and befriend, to Muslims only, okay? They are your brothers. And like I said, it doesn't matter if they're different races or cultures, you're all Muslims. You're supposed to have the second, the hatred and the disavowal and the renunciation of everyone who's not a Muslim, okay? And this is an ironclad doctrine. And it's not just disavowal. I mentioned hatred. Quran 64, this is one of the most problematic verses that very few people know. 60 as in Surah 60, ayah or verse 4. It basically says, you have a good example in Ibrahim, okay, who's the Abraham, okay, the Genesis Abraham figure, because of course Islam appropriates all the biblical figures and gives them different names and different roles. So in Genesis, Abraham, God calls him from the land of Ur, and he leaves, and that's basically what we know. In the Islamic rendering, before he leaves, he tells his kinsmen, hatred and enmity will exist between you and me, or you and us, Muslims, because he's a Muslim, until you believe in Allah alone. And then that verse says, and he is a good example for you, Muslims. This is how you should feel towards non-Muslims. And then there's all sorts of examples of some of the pious Muslims that were befriended with Muhammad, including the first caliph and the second caliph. They fought and killed their relatives, and that's good. Allah likes that because it shows their loyalty is to the Ummah and the Muslims, not their. And there's a verse that says, and even if they're your fathers or your brothers or whoever, you can't be loyal or befriend them because they're infidels. And I have a video which I translated like 15 years ago of an Egyptian cleric talking in Arabic, and he's talking about this very doctrine. And he mentions how Muslim men can marry people of the book, which means Christians and Jewish women. But he says, but you have to hate them, and you have to let them know you hate them, and you can have sex with them and enjoy them. But as long as the hatred is in your heart, okay. So this is a teaching now.
But is that just some wacko, or
it's in the Quran? I mean, you can say he's a wacko. It was clear, some of the even Muslims were very like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, well, what do you want to do? There it is. And he mentioned the verse that I told you and others. So that's the problem. Now, I'm telling you all this because I told you there's 3 doctrines. So the first one, this is the first one. It's
love Muslims, hate non-Muslims.
Yeah, and they're loyal to fellow Muslims. And so what Muhammad did, I always say this is his genius, if you will, is that he took the tribal mores of his society, 7th century Arabia, which is ultra tribalistic, but he re-articulated them through a theological paradigm. So now it's not normal tribalism, me and my family against yours. It's the Muslims versus the rest of the world. The rest of the world is the other, the non-tribe. And just like it was in Arabia in the 7th century, the non-tribe member is someone who you can kill and enslave and do whatever you want to. Okay, so that became the doctrine. And I was telling you earlier that Muslims are not permitted to migrate voluntarily and live under non-Islamic authority, okay? Because you're not supposed to be loyal to them. How can you give allegiance? The caveat is, and this goes back, so we've dealt with the first one, the loyalty and enmity, and now we're talking about jihad again. And the caveat is, okay, you can go to these European countries, and as long as you are in one way or the other involved in jihad on behalf of Islam. Now, the historic manifestation, which I mentioned, of jihad is violent warfare. Okay, this is why they translated it as holy war. But this is what I find funny. A lot of the apologists today will tell you, no, holy war is wrong because the word jihad really means to struggle and to strive, which is true, but that actually makes it even more problematic or makes it even more dangerous, and it underscores what's going on. That is the literal meaning of the word. You are supposed to struggle and strive on behalf of Islam. Historically, that meant war, because nobody was going to just give in to you unless you force them. So now Muslim clerics have articulated a number of jihad struggles that are not militant or physical. They call them, and they give them different names. I'm just translating them in my head. There's the jihad of the tongue, the jihad of the pen, the jihad of money, the baby jihad, and all of these Muslims who, if you migrate to the West, are expected to be engaged in this because that is how you're still a good Muslim. If you're just going to the West because you want a good life, well, okay, you're a traitor, you're not a real Muslim. So, but if you're doing these, jihad of the pen and the tongue means I'm somehow engaged in propaganda on behalf of Islam. I'm trying to demoralize Westerners. I'm doing what's called dawah. I'm preaching Islam. Okay, I'm making Islam look good. Jihad of the money, of course, is I'm a rich Saudi and I just spend millions to help further whatever Islamist jihadist causes. And the baby jihad, this is the really dangerous one in many ways in Europe, is the Muslims are encouraged to be as fertile as possible and overwhelm Europe. They literally have said that. I mean, there's clerics on videos saying your job is go there and have as many babies as you want. And you go to Europe right now, and many of the major capitals, the number one newborn baby name is Muhammad. Okay, so I'm trying to show you the continuity of what had gone on historically, and
it's really fast though, because there's one piece that is missing in all this. So you use a word. I could follow all of your logic, but you use a word that, at least with the items you put on the table, does not yet make sense to me, which is the most dangerous thing is. And the most dangerous thing is that they're basically outbreeding. They're going to have more kids.
The most fundamental, on a philosophical level, the most dangerous thing is this is a hostile element or demographic that is trying to take over whichever way.
Yeah.
Demographically.
Okay. So let me push deeper into this really fast, and you can tell me if I'm getting this wrong. So your worldview has internal consistency if I believe the following. So for that to be dangerous, there has to be some part, and I know the punchline, I think, of what you're going to say because I've studied you so closely. But there's this element of, okay, this is high risk because they act one way when they're weak and they act another way when they're strong. And so the reason I think you have to walk us through now, if this actually is what you're saying, through why you believe it is erroneous to call this a religion of peace, even though in the Quran itself, there are overtures to peace, to non-coercive, like you can't coerce people to change their religion, all of that stuff. And so when I hear you, because I've heard so many other things, I think I know where you're headed with that. But if you can define, like if I were to say, hey, Christians, go forth and prosper, go to the far ends of the earth and bring Jesus to people, make people's lives better. And do it by writing, do it by speaking, do it by having more children, do it by proselytizing. It sounds awesome. It only starts sounding dark when you start using words like it's propaganda, this is a dangerous thing. It's like, well, I would expect the religions of the world to compete and to compete in nonviolent ways. Like, I'm not going to have beef with that. Like, yeah, that's exactly what you should do. So the word dangerous makes sense if you're just like, I don't want my religion to be the one that loses, even though I don't really have an explanation as to why mine is better, but that would make sense. Or if you believe for some reason that they would do all these nonviolent jihads only to lead to something violent. So walk me through.
They can do all the non-violent stuff, and a lot of them think it's great. Well, like you say, Muslims don't see themselves as the bad guys.
Right.
Okay, so when they...
But you said your parents wouldn't see them as bad guys either.
Yeah, not necessarily. My parents, I think, would have had the same idea with me, which is the religion's messed up and the core teachings, but we know a lot of nice Muslims who don't do it. Okay, that's the understanding in general.
Because that's going to be the big thing, though, looming in this whole argument is why aren't we just talking about reform? Why aren't we talking about Muslims having an enlightenment?
We're not talking about reform because we're not Muslims, okay? Muslims need to talk about reform. It's
fair.
It's ridiculous for you and me to talk about reform. If they want to reform it, that's one thing, and a lot of that's been going on, but we're talking about a lot of good stuff, but you did say something I want to unpack a little bit, which is, like some of the verses in the Quran are good, and why are you looking at the bad ones? So I should tell you, there's an entire science of how Muslims approach that. Because for Muslims, Islam is a legalistic religion. Okay, it's not, I would argue Christianity was very legalistic in its own sense, but Islam is legalistic in that it's not about, some spiritual, relationship I have. I mean, again, Christianity didn't even have that idea until a few centuries ago. And in Islam, so it's a law. We're looking for the law and we're deriving it from the words of Allah and the example of the Prophet. Now, you're right. I can open the Quran and there's good verses and a lot of that.
And good means peace.
Yeah, peaceful, nonviolent, cooperative, and, stuff that a lot of Muslim apologists will tell you, well, look at that. So what are you talking about? Now, the issue is the Muslim clerics who have a huge role. In fact, they're part of Sharia law. It's called ijma, which means consensus, which is if there's any ambiguity, it's what the Islamic clerics have agreed upon. That becomes part of Sharia law, okay? And so they approached it and they looked and they said, yeah, there's a different things. And then they realized, you might have touched on this, but that the whole revelation, as it's understood, of the Quran to Muhammad was done based oftentimes on the circumstances of his life. And so you find that the earliest revelations, they divide them by two. One is in Mecca, that's the older one, and later one's in Medina. And they even talk about them as the Medinan Quran and the Meccan Quran, even though they're one Quran. And so the Meccan Quran is where Muhammad was weak, he was outnumbered, he didn't have any followers for a while, and then when he did, it was like 100. And he's living amongst what would be seen as a hostile pagan peoples, the Quraysh of Mecca. Okay. Those are the verses where they come off. There's no war. He's not calling for jihad or anything like that. He does the hijrah. The migration in the year 622, goes to Medina. And there he starts becoming a political leader. Okay. And before long, he starts doing the jihad and he starts going and doing caravan raids and attacking. And in 8 years, he's conquered almost most of Arabia, including Mecca itself.
Was he like a military genius?
I mean, these are
Conquered a lot.
Yeah, but in the context of Arabia, these would be seen as sort of small scale. I mean, they're almost described as, Bedouin raids.
But he gets a good reputation,
Yeah,
I assume.
No, he does. And you can say, some people would say, of course, he was a tactician to some degree, right? So he wins. And now, but in as much as he gets stronger during this phase, the Medina, and he keeps conquering, the revelations now take a different tone. Okay.
So God starts revealing different stuff.
Right. Now that you're able to, okay, now you can go on the offensive. But before, when you were weak, you preach peace. So now the clerics have concluded there's three basically phases or there's three categories which any Muslim, even today, can find themselves in. One, you're completely outnumbered by the infidel.
Yep.
In which case, live and let live. And you should quote those Meccan verses. Two,
I'm sorry, in that phase, how much is Taqiyya?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Taqiyya is another whole verse, and it's actually it's tied up with the doctrine of having, not being loyal to infidels. It's Quran 328. And it basically says, it's one of those verses, do not befriend, the infidel. And that verse, though, ends up by saying, unless it's by way of taking precautions. And that word traces back to the word taqiyya. And again, the clerics have, the exegesis of it is basically that, if you are under non-infidel authority, you can say whatever or pretend whatever to make them not, persecute you, right. Which means you can renounce Islam. You can convert to Christianity if they're persecuting you, let's say. You can engage in baptism. That's what actually happened right before and what drew on the Inquisition actually in Spain, because there was a large Muslim population that was engaged in that Taqiyya.
So they're pretending.
Yeah.
We're good Christians.
Yeah.
But, psych, just kidding, at home, we're teaching hatred of the infidel.
In one of my books, Sword and Scimitar, I have a long quote from a Spaniard who said, these people converted. They went to church more than we did. They were model Christians. They were always at mass, and it looked like they were reading the Bible, and it would go on generation and generation. You'd think, okay, 3-4 generations, yeah. Then they find out at home they're reading the Quran, preaching undying hatred for the infidel, and working to subvert Spain back to Islam. Okay?
And do you have a mental model, like when you look at the UK or the US, do you have a mental model of like, this is a very small percentage of people that do this, but because you can't tell if they're actually moderate or if they're just faking being moderate,
exactly.
That it creates a real
So you
problem.
have categories. You have the open, avowed jihadist, who I actually find refreshing because they're honest.
Just telling you the truth.
Yeah. And this would be like the ISIS type, who literally send out tracts and letters saying, here's why we're fighting you. We're fighting you because you're an infidel and we have to hate you. Okay, whereas other Muslims, smarter ones maybe, will play the grievance mantra. Oh, we're fighting you because you started it, because of, whatever, colonialism, because you're attacking the Arab world, whatever, okay? And that's a lot of Islamist groups engage in that. And that's the jihad of the tongue, for example. But you're right. So then you have this gray zone who maybe seem moderate and maybe some aren't, but you don't know which is the one who's pretending, which is the one who's waiting for the circumstances to change. Okay. I give this analogy and you were even saying, I think you mentioned like in Europe and these growing Muslim numbers, but you don't know. I mean, it's a small number, it's a big number. But here's the thing. If I'm a governor or I'm a leader of, let's say, a European nation, and my duties to my people, first and foremost, I think all of them would agree with this analogy because everyone now agrees, even the most conservative measure. People will tell you, the apologists for Islam who don't think it's a big deal. They'll tell you, okay, yeah, there's a bunch of rotten apples, but maybe it's like 5%, or maybe it's 1%, or maybe 10. They'll minimize it. But to me, we still have a massive problem. It's like saying, you know what, I'm going to give you a jar of candy. There's 100 here. 5 are poison, no biggie. Okay, let's eat them. Would you give that to your kid? I wouldn't. Right. Okay, because, and again, I understand the 90, 95, 99 are not like that. But why is it incumbent on me to take this risk when I know it's part of that? And there are people doing this. We know that. And this is what I mean. Even the most liberal, leftist, woke person will agree and say, yeah, I think most Muslims are good, but yeah, I know there's a few radicals. But right there, you've admitted to something that I personally, if I was a leader who cares about my people, I wouldn't engage in that. Why would I take
really
something
fast, just because I can preempt what people are thinking right now. Right. So every group is going to have their crazies. I don't know that McVeigh, who did the Oklahoma City bombing, I don't know that he quoted Christianity, but boy, I wouldn't be surprised.
They say they try to claim, okay.
So now it's like, well, do I start being super paranoid about all Christians, or is it that, well, hold on a second. If you look at the Old Testament, sure, there's some wacky shit and I'm going to be stoning all kinds of people. But if you go, well, this is New Testament Christianity, that's what this is about. This is about following in Jesus's footsteps. And he clearly, if you're modeling your behavior after him, you're gonna have a lot harder time finding somebody that goes on the offensive. And however, on the Muslim side, if you start really hardlining and going with the word of the Quran, now you're running into trouble. Is that where you make the distinction, or do you not? And you just go, hey, these have more crazies than other places, or their crazies are more dangerous. And that's why my warning is about Muslims and not about Christians. I also believe that ideology will tap into dormant things within inside the human. And this is why there's a book called Ordinary Men about how Hitler turned these ordinary cops into the most ruthless killing machine, where they were out shooting naked pregnant women during the Holocaust. And so it's like, yeah, that's horrifying. And that's doctrine that comes and tells you, not only is this okay, this is good, and you should do this, and this is good for the German people, and yay. And so I know that humans will fall prey to doctrine that makes them feel good about something that, from where I'm sitting, is absolutely psychotic. So the reason I look at Christians and I'm like, okay, look, they are going to have their crazies. But if I can peel you off of the Old Testament, I've at least got more to work with over here. It's far more poetic. It's far more turn the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. I don't know the Quran well enough, so I can't tell you. But looking at that side, either you're saying this group, for whatever reason, has a higher percentage of what Tom Bilyeu is calling crazy people. I don't want to put that word on you. But either you believe that they have a higher percentage of problematic people, or the doctrine somehow is more problematic, and therefore we need to be worried about them and not the Christians.
Yeah, the latter. So I agree with you that you have psychotic, crazy people of all races and creeds, okay? But in Islam, the teachings are prone to exploit that sort of thing. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I remember, I forget who it was, some Brennan maybe, CIA agent, CIA director a few years ago, and he was trying to minimize the ISIS phenomenon. And he's saying, no, this has nothing to do with Islam. ISIS, Islamic State, and the atrocities they're engaged in. And he said, because if you look at all the people who are involved in it, they're all former criminals, and they just are criminals. And okay, so he's trying to say, oh, these are just criminals who are trying to justify their criminality. Or could it be that because Islam actually justifies this stuff, these criminal elements find themselves gravitating towards it? Okay, so beheading people and crucifying them and engaging in raping and enslaving. Okay, there's people who think and do that regardless of religion. Westerners, non-Westerners, all races. But if you have a religion that now actually promotes this and puts a pious veneer on it and tells you you're going to go to heaven, I think that has, the capacity to really radicalize and win over people, as opposed to what you're saying, for example, about Jesus. Okay, are there Christians who are nominal Christians who want to engage in violence? And yeah, of course. But they don't have the ideological support the way a Muslim or a convert to Islam would have it. And this, again, this is just
Does it actually say behead people in the Quran?
Yeah. And crucify them, chop their fingertips off. And slit their throat. And so for example, if you look in Europe, rape in a lot of these countries, it's something like 80% by Muslim migrants. Okay, even though they are often under 10% of the population. So what do you make of that? There has to be a correlation. They usually they don't want these numbers to come out. They don't want people to understand what's going on. But it's like, yeah, there's a correlate. If a man who's, again, nominal Christian, yeah, do some of them rape? Yeah, obviously. But this person's not going to be able to go quote the Bible, okay? And the Old Testament thing is not really the same. We can talk about that. It's not, the Old Testament is descriptive. It's not prescriptive. The Quran is prescriptive.
Give me the difference.
The difference is, okay, so a lot of people tell you, why are you picking on the Quran, the violence? Didn't you read the Old Testament, Joshua, genocide, God? Okay.
They're wild.
Yeah. The difference is this. Think of it whatever you want, okay? But it's no, everyone who read it and understand it, it's written in a very temporal language. It's finite. It gives you the names of the enemies, the Hebusites, the Pebusites, the Canaanites, okay? None of who exist. And it uses a language which is basically, you understand, the Hebrews in the now are fighting this group of people. Now, again, you can make of it whatever you want, but it's not prescriptive in the sense that in the Quran, it's the same thing. You know, there were actual historic enemies that the Arabs were fighting in the 7th century, the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Sasanians, the Quraysh, the pagans. But they're not given their name. They're actually called the non-Muslims, the kafir, okay, which is the infidel translated.
We'll get back to the show in a second, but first, let's talk about one thing your business cannot afford to get wrong. It's not your product. It's not even your marketing. It's not payroll. It's your decisions. Every wrong call starts the same way. Someone did not have the numbers. They looked at incomplete data from different systems and went with their gut, and it cost them. NetSuite by Oracle fixes all of this. It's the #1 AI cloud ERP trusted by over 43,000 businesses. It brings your financials, inventory, commerce, HR, and CRM all into one source of truth. That connected data makes your AI smarter, so it doesn't guess, it knows. If your revenues are at least in the 7 figures, get NetSuite's free business guide, Demystifying AI, at netsuite.com/theory. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/theory. And now let's get back to the show. What you're describing sounds to me less like that the Old Testament isn't prescriptive. It's more that the Old Testament is specific and the Quran is generalized.
It's open-ended, even the verbs. So when you read the verb of killing the infidel, it's in the present. Fight and kill the infidel. So if I'm a Muslim, I read it. Okay, it's it's speaking to me in the now. Whereas I read an Old Testament passage about Joshua warring. Okay, it is what it is. It doesn't necessarily, I don't read it as this is instruction for me.
Okay. How do you feel about the following statement? To me, as I hear this, and I have not read the Old Testament, nor have I read the Quran. So people that know more than me can think something totally different. But Old Testament at the headline level, I've heard enough that I'm like, this is wild shit. And I'm just going to set it all aside because it's so crazy. It makes me dislike their version of God that is not interesting to me at all. The behavior that seems condoned, even if it's not told you need to go do this, is crazy. And I've certainly heard stuff like you can stone people to death for homosexuality and things like that, which
Leviticus,
I couldn't sign against harder if I tried. So it's like, okay, all of that is atrocious. And so I look at that stuff and I'm hand wavy away to like, you obviously need to get away from that. And so I feel like it would be just to do the same thing to the Quran. So is it that accidentally, the way that the Old Testament is structured linguistically, it just doesn't have the mind virus effect into the present that the Quran accidentally ends up having. So it's not that we should ascribe to Muhammad any extra like sort of bad vibes or whatever you want to say than you would to the writers of the Old Testament. It's just that his linguistic choices end up having this knock-on effect throughout history that were not present in the Old Testament. Or does that feel naive?
No, that sounds like a secular rationalization, okay? But a believer of a Christian or a Muslim, the Christian and I assume possibly the Jew could say no, it was intentionally written that way, so we don't go and kill people today. Whereas the Muslim will tell you no, it's intentionally written that way because jihad is still alive in the now.
That's the knock-on effect I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It gives people, as they interpret it, the lens through which to say that interpretation.
Right.
But ultimately, it does come down to the things happening in the books are pretty horrifying.
I mean, there's people who've said if you really compare the violence and the atrocities and the sort of bad vibes in the Old Testament, that they're worse than the Quran.
Yeah.
Okay. But again, it goes to, I'm not looking at, the words are the words, but how do they guide the people today? And we're not seeing Jews and Christians doing that sort of thing, okay? we are seeing Muslims doing that sort of thing. I've given some reasons why I think that's the case, because it's described, the language is very, including the tense, it's prescriptive, it's generic, it's open-ended. When it says fight, okay, so like I told you, the Old Testament says fight these groups of people who don't exist. The Quran says fight the non-Muslim until he is subjugated. Well, if I'm a Muslim and I read that, there's non-Muslims all around me and they're not subjugated. So that's why I think it takes more of an immediate tone.
Okay, so we're knee deep in the doctrine here.
And otherwise, just to continue this, so otherwise, how would one explain it? Why is it that this is happening amongst Muslims? It's obvious. And it's not happening if all religions have their wackos. Why is it so overwhelmingly? You look at any of these European countries and you look at, the number of terrorist attacks, and they're overwhelmingly Muslims, even though Muslims are a minority. Yeah. So what if it's not what I'm saying, what else could it be?
I think I have a different read on all of this than you. I'll lay it out here so people don't think I'm dodging the question, but this is probably not yet the point in the interview where we go down this path. Okay. But my thing goes like this. Culture clashes are real. I worry about that a lot. They decohere society, and then you get all kinds of madness. I'm a big believer that cultures are going to compete. I want my culture to win because I grew up in it and it treated me very well and I love it. I love the way it made me feel. I love the way it makes me feel towards other people, makes me feel open and inclusive. I love all of that, but it also makes me want to play to win. And so there's this really cool thing if I want an open playing field and yet I want to get so good that I can beat everybody else. So that's why I love my culture and why I want to see it win. But I also only want an even playing field. And so that's where this gets strange, where it's like, okay, how protective do we be? Now, I'm a person who believes you have to have very strict immigration policies. And so I have a feeling we'll agree on that, but it might be for different reasons. So that's the part that I will, hopefully we'll have time at the end to get to. So what I'm trying to tease out are Muslims right now culturally, because I've heard you've been very clear on doctrine and your hypothesis is it creates this way outsized and very unique impact on the world. To me, it's very in line with what Sam Harris says. I think there's a lot there. It makes sense as an argument. And what I'm trying to figure out is it that, or is it just that they're having more kids, they're more confident in themselves, and so they're not afraid to be like, yeah, fuck you, my religion is better. And so, yes, I'm going to come to your country, you're wealthy, you guys have cooler shit, I'm going to come here, I'm going to raise my kids here, but we're going to terraform this place culturally. We're going to take it over, we're going to take the advantages that you guys have, keep that rolling. But at the same time, you guys are living a super lame, like value system life, and we're going to take that over. And it's like, yeah, I both understand why a culture would think that's a good idea if they have like the confidence of their culture. And I understand why the country that's being done to would be like, fuck right off. And so when I see Japan being like, nope, you guys got to go, I find it funny. Now, I also I tried to do business in Japan. It went nowhere. Like it was.
So they're not open, in other words.
They're not open in the slightest. And it's created this incredibly unique culture that I have gained so much enjoyment from, insights from, whatever, that I completely respect and enjoy being able to interact with their culture. I don't think it's better than ours, but I really find it engaging. So the fact that they would tell me like, hey, we want to do business with Japanese people, you can go away.
Bugger off.
Like, I'm like, hey, I get it. No worries. Like you do you. It's part of what makes you interesting. Okay. So now I get it. It becomes very existential from a cultural perspective. So I'm watching what's happening in Europe and I am aghast that they don't believe in themselves and they look at what they've accomplished. They have the largest empire in the world and all they can see is, but we were bad people. Like, and I'm just like, what the fuck? Yeah. So anyway, that to me feels like a very inappropriate read of what you've done historically. I'm all for people going, well, there were parts of this that were horrific. And so we'd never rerun that experiment. But at the same time, to be able to see what it looks like when we're muscular and strong and we believe in ourselves and like all of that, we're going to check ourselves so that we don't, sort of redo. And I mean, I think in many ways, the American system post-World War II was us trying to do colonialism right. We'd go in and help, but we wouldn't take over. We had a military base, but we're not trying to tell you what to do. So it's like, we want to control the economy, but like you can still be Japanese. You know what I mean? So that we got closer. trust me, you can go down very dark paths of things the US has done, and you hopefully get better and better and better over time. But nonetheless, I do not share the sort of self-suicidal, self-flagellating look at America or the UK or wherever. But I also don't immediately extend to Islam that right now is like having their moment. Like it's working, man. Having babies, believing in your book, like recruiting the shit out of other people, telling them like, yo, these guys are weak. Like, look at these idiots, the way they run their country. Like, forget all that. Like, we're going to be tough. We're going to be strong. We're not going to be pushed around. Hey, now, to your point at the beginning, there comes a time where, wait, hold on. If you're going to tell me how to live, now I have a real fucking problem. And so part of the reason I wanted to interview you is I am looking at this going, is there a uniquely escalatory problem where this religion, the diehards, you've been very clear, and it makes a lot of sense to me that it's probably a small number, but that the diehards are going to make problems for me. And especially because I believe that American culture right now does not believe in itself, is very weak, but I want to see it reassert itself. I want to see America be strong again from a cultural perspective. I'm not Christian, even a little bit. However, I believe I have grown up in the cultural soup of believing that the individual is sovereign, that there is a little bit of divinity in all of us, and therefore there should be individual freedoms and all of that. I look at Islam, does not seem compatible with that. Maybe people will make me a believer. I doubt it, but it's certainly possible. So that's sort of how I come at all of this. And as I was saying before we started rolling, what I want to understand are all the base assumptions that you have that lead you to your conclusions. Because then I can go either agree with the base assumptions or I don't. And then I can build my own thinking rather than just being a parrot who's like, oh, I've never thought through this, so I'm just going to parrot back what you say or what somebody else says. No. I understand the base assumptions. And so now I'm like, well, is that true or not? Okay. So we were in Doctrine. Have you laid out all of the doctrines you believe that make Islam uniquely problematic, or are there more?
Yeah, there were three. So the first one I mentioned, loyalty, enmity, tribalism essentially, but deified, which creates the hostility. That manifests itself as jihad. So that's the physical manifestation that we're familiar with, which can be expressed as terrorism, warfare, conquest. And the third one is basically the idea that once a conquest happens, which kind of goes to where you're going, I think you're asking me like, okay, Muslims are just competing like everyone else and they're having their moment, but is it going to get dark in the end? So what happened to conquered, subject populations historically is not what, for example, happened under the Mongols. Okay, so the Mongols actually, they were really brutal. Yeah, exactly. There's no one has reached that level. Okay, but they actually gave freedom of religion, and we weren't supremacist against you because you believe this or that or the other thing. Islam doesn't have that. Okay, so in Islam, once you're conquered, you pay tribute and you have to be a second-class citizen. Now, this actually continues throughout the Islamic world. If you talk about Egypt, my ancestral homeland, that's what you will see more. Not necessarily physical persecution, that happens. Okay, but what's ingrained in the culture is a sort of discriminatory attitude towards the non-Muslim, let's say the Christian. You are a second-class citizen, okay?
So why weren't your parents more angry with Muslims?
I'll tell you why, because they're born into that, and that's normal. And there's a word for it, dhimmitude, which means, a dhimmi is like that kind of person.
Right.
They're called dhimmis. And dhimmitude is this mentality, you're born into it and you just accept it. Yeah, I mean, they're the overlords, they're the majority, so I need to know my place. So, and not necessarily my parents that were like that, but that's kind of what influences a lot of people like that. They're just they're born into it. That's how I have to be. It's a fair price. They're the majority. The idea of, everyone has their freedom, like the American or Western idea, that's so alien. And I would say it's not organic. I mean, we have to learn that.
It's like a caste system.
Yeah. And that's more organic. It's organic to be, I'm a minority. Let me just be grateful they're not killing me. They're giving me some measure of tolerance. That's good. That's, I think, how most people would understand it. Right. What we have is actually, it's manufactured. It's good, but it's not naturally an organic thing that just everyone realizes, oh yeah, everyone's equal. Right. That's what I mean. It goes back to the tribalism.
And is it in the Quran that you have to be a second-class citizen?
Yeah. Quran 9:29, it says, Fight the people of the book, which is understood as Jews and Christians, who actually, so this is actually good. I mean, the other people who are not Jews and Christians, you're supposed to just kill them unless they convert. The Jews and the Christians, according to this verse, 929, you fight them until they keep fighting and you kill them, or they submit and they pay tribute. And it says, and they live feeling subjugated and humbled. And then there's a whole entire jurisprudence about how to make them feel that way. So historically, there were times when the Jew or Christian comes and pays. The tax gatherer has to pull their beard and slap them. They have to crawl on all fours.
That's in the Quran?
No. That was a practice.
How does
based
that
on the
become
verse.
The practice?
Based on the verse that they have to feel humbled, which is in the Quran, the jurists would enforce these types of humiliation rituals because of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so those are the doctrines. But to your point, okay, you were, I think, and correct me if I'm paraphrasing you wrong, but you were saying kind of it's okay if Muslims want to come in and it's they're competing with ideas and they're proud of their way and they're just bringing their thing, right? Which was okay, I think you're saying.
Yeah,
but the problem is what?
If you're going to force your religion on other people,
okay.
Now I have beef.
Okay, all right. So it's not an either or with Islam. Okay, it's not either they are just this is their moment, or they are just they have a dark agenda. Okay, the two can work together actually, and they often do. And I'll give you a perfect historical precedent which may illuminate what we're discussing, because you were talking about you don't like the self-flagellation of the West and whatnot. So historically, if you go back to the colonial era. And again, the problem with the colonial era is most people don't know what happened before it, okay, which was the long drawn jihad and conquest of Christian territories. And the colonial era was finally when Europe was now stronger and went on the offense and it entered the Muslim lands, which were formerly Christian, okay. Now, what they did is, okay, you can say they conquered the Arabs and the Muslim and the Asians and Africans and whatnot during the colonial era. But the difference is they actually brought a lot of good stuff, honestly. Okay, they actually brought science, technology, medicine, progress, which was not there, literacy, okay, printing presses. That's what the Europeans brought during the colonial era.
All right, pause right there for a second. Okay. I think this is going to be very important. So obviously there are people right now in the comments freaking out.
Why?
That you would say that anything positive came out of colonialism.
Yeah.
So now let's set the stage. Why didn't they have those things before? Why did
the Arabs, Muslims?
Whatever nation they're going into that should be, and I'm sure some of them do actually say, well, we did get a couple bits and bobs out of this. But why didn't they have those things? Was there something about the West, the culture, the religion, whatever? Like, does Christianity bring you science? Because Christians killed a lot of scientists. Mm-hmm. So like, what was it about the West that was good? What's the relationship between Islam and the Dark Ages? Like, I know there's a tie there. So walk me through why there's even that dichotomy in the first place, where you could get the West coming in and colonialism, despite the brutality, is somehow also a little bit positive.
All right, and to try to answer that, let me tell you what let's say Islam did. So we can kind of balance what we're talking about. So I told you before that is the conquest, and Muslims enter Christian, even European territories, and they conquer them. Until today, okay, if you look at Spain and the Balkans, and they have their deep history, the Spaniards and the Balkans, and they still have areas that are so devastated just from warfare, okay, with the Muslims. And what was brought at the time, I mean, literally, if you look at the sources, it was in mass enslavement, okay? And we're talking about from the very beginning, when, let's say the 8th century, when Muslims entered Spain, until, the Ottomans are finally become the old man of Europe, which is like in the 19th century, okay? You can look at that, there's all this enslavement, but there's none of the countries in the European countries, and they all, you can go talk to Hungarians, go talk to Romanians, they tell you our land has been devastated and there was nothing brought here, okay? And not necessarily even because, it was because the Muslims are not going to give the good stuff to their subject slave people, all right? But they didn't also have the technology at the time. So now you're asking me, why did the West end up having the great technology? That's open to debate why they progressed, but they had it, and they brought it. So it was actually called, it was understood and by Europeans as maybe you're familiar, the white man's burden.
I've certainly heard the phrase.
Rudyard Kipling. He was he was a writer and some clerk, I think, in India. This is during the colonial era. And, the white man, and I talk about triggering, but the white man saw his mission is to go and civilize the savages of Asia, the Muslim countries, Africa. Okay, so they went, they conquered, they colonized, but they saw it like, look, we're bringing them to this, that, and the other thing. Now, here's the important point. Okay, a lot of people say, well, that's the European narrative. Guess what? I've read books because I've researched this. If you look at, let's say, the 1800s, which is the high moment of colonialism, depending on the country, also in the early 1900s, if you look at the writings of the people living there in Egypt, which I have, they talk about this as the best time ever. Okay?
Colonialism?
Yes. Colonialism. Algeria just passed a law because Algeria
was this written by people that were I'm writing this sentence under colonialism?
Yeah, this is the era they're living in, and the way they talk and the way they describe things, this is the best time ever.
Are they not worried that their writing is being monitored?
No, because everyone agreed with them. Okay, Ataturk, so the Ottoman Empire was the scourge of Europe for centuries. This is a historic fact. It was the jihad is standard bearer more than the Arabs historically. Once they start losing, and Europe is now becoming stronger.
So they're losing to Europe.
Yeah, losing to Europe, losing land, just losing the momentum, and now Europe is stronger and moving in. Once that starts happening, you know what they do? They completely emulate the Europeans. They get Turkish used to be, Ottoman Turkish was written with the Arabic script. They said, oh, that's backwards. We want to adopt the European alphabet. They all shaved their beards. They put on suits and ties. Women were dressed in Western dress. No more hijab. Okay. That's not because Europeans forced them. This was because you were talking about confidence. It was because the European colonialists were very confident about their culture. The subject people saw the boons they were coming with, and they were the winning dog. And guess what? We want to be like that. We want to copy that. If you look at pictures from these Middle Eastern nations, you will be amazed. If you look at a 1920s picture compared to 2020, 1920s, you'll think you're looking at Europe. In 2020, you're looking at, 7th century Arabia is how it looks. A lot of that was because there was a sort of symbiotic relationship between, and which is still going on today, and you have alluded to it, but it's much worse today. It's the opposite. Back then, it was a confident Europe who is coming in, and Muslims are now, Islam fell to the wayside. And there's a theory that and I kind of touched on it, the reason that Islam ever even mattered was because it was seen as the winning horse. People sided with Muhammad once he started getting stronger. And the more the conquest spread, the more people became Muslims. And, you become richer and you have a piece of the plunder and et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So when Muslims started saying, oh, you know what? Islam gets me nothing. I'm living in the desert. Whereas these people are progressing and they're bringing all this magic with them, science and technology and medicine. Oh, well, let's act like them. Okay? That's literally what happened. And I was just telling you, there's Algeria just passed a law because actually, if you're an Algerian, and it's mostly, this is geared towards older Algerians who lived during the colonial era under France, if you speak well of it, you can go to jail. Okay? If you speak well of the French colonial era. And I was telling you because a lot of people look back nostalgically, older generations, that was the good time. Okay? Now, what's happening today, which you've touched on, is the exact opposite. In as much as the West has started to lose faith in itself, lose its confidence, and become, like a doormat and tell everyone, oh, your culture is way better than ours. That Muslims are not impressed by that. That doesn't inspire them. That doesn't make them like you. That actually gives them nothing but contempt. And they say, yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. My culture is better than yours. And this all really coalesced with one man. His name is Sayyid Qutb. He was an Egyptian. He's with the Muslim Brotherhood. And, by all measures, he was moderate, if you want to use that term. And then he came to the United States in the 50s, and he spent time, and he was just aghast at what he saw, what he considered immoral behavior, especially that men and women were freely consorting. Long story short, he went back, and he became a very popular writer and chief theoretician for the Brotherhood. And his conclusion was, okay, yeah, these people are good with science, technology, whatever. Let's appropriate and learn that. But we want nothing to do with their culture because it's just pathetic, and it's just they're pathetic. They're just crazy. So what culture is a Muslim's going to fall back on then? Well, Islam. So there's definitely been that kind of response, but it's incomplete. It's the complete, you know, you're telling me about your viewers, and this really reminds me of I did an interview with me and Peter Boghossian.
Which was fantastic.
Yeah, and a cameraman, I think if you've seen it,
I have,
was unhinged.
Yeah.
And everything he said, I mean, I'm just sorry, but it's like, you're wrong. You don't know your history. It just seems like people today, the history they've been indoctrinated in is white man bad, everyone good. White man evil, everyone passive victim. And I'm not here to exonerate white man. I don't think of myself as a white man, by the way. Okay, so, but whatever the white man did, you know what? The other guys did it too. And often in a much more graphic way. And it's kind of like, so where's the balance? And I even told him everything was like, oh, well, colonialism did this. Well, I'm like, what about the 1,000 years of jihad and conquest and colonization? That doesn't matter. You're talking about the 1 century where actually Muslims liked it because they got so many benefits. That's the nightmare. And so my point is, there's a lot of people who've been really misled with history. You know, a lot of people, we know of the concept of fake news, which I think is very dangerous because but as I always say, fake news is ephemeral. It creates its mischief and then dissipates. I find fake history much more problematic and very dangerous because it creates overarching narratives and paradigms, and people see reality through it. And if it's fake, everything's going to be just completely distorted in your mind.
What are the beats of fake history that are relevant to this conversation?
I'll give you a very popular one, which is if I speak about slavery, that means white people enslaving blacks. Is that real? Yeah, that happened, of course. Is it bad? Yes. But if you just think that's all that ever happened, well, then white people are evil. And people say that. I saw this, she's a professor, Bridget Cooper at Rutgers University, a black woman. She literally says that, you know, and the way she talks is as if nobody's enslaved anyone except white people. Okay, so that is a fake history. If you now understand that, yeah, whites did that, but blacks enslaved whites, blacks enslaved blacks, whites enslaved whites, okay? And it's been a nonstop thing that has happened historically. Muslims enslaved everyone, okay? And if anything, well, guess what? Who did abolish slavery? It was whites. At least they did that, okay, around the world. So my point, you see, but if you jettison all that out and, oh, it's only the white man who did slavery, that's going to poison your mind. And then you will believe in the woke theories, kind of like, oh yeah, because, every black person's problem in America is because of people are still racist. You know, you're going to believe that because if you believe that fake history. But if you understand it in context, which is everyone did it, but at least we can say one group abolished it. So it kind of changes how you may see the actual reality that's unfolding before us.
And what is some of the framing that people would have about Muslims or Islam itself that are misleading, that are giving them a different picture of what's happening right now versus what you believe is actually happening right now?
Like, so for example, the fake histories about Islam. Those are so deep. I'll give you one. I always quote this because it's been etched into my head. There's a former professor, he wasn't mine, but I used to see him at Georgetown University. I used to attend there in the Middle Eastern programs, and his name is John Esposito. And in the early 2000s, he was like the Don. I mean, he was the editor of the Oxford History of Islam, and the FBI and CIA and all the intelligence agencies would talk to him about terrorism. And he has a line in one of his books. The book is called Islam, the Straight Path. And the line goes as follows: 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence elapsed between Christians and Muslims until an imperial papal power play led to a series of holy wars which have left centuries of enduring mistrust. Which means from the dawn of Islam until the First Crusade in 1095, peaceful coexistence, until the First Crusade, and now Muslims are upset. Okay. As I've alluded, those 4 or 5 centuries actually is when Muslims savagely conquered 3/4 of the Christian world. All right. In 1 year alone, in 1009, okay, this is the same century of the First Crusade later, one caliph, according to Muslim sources, destroyed 30,000 churches.
Yo.
Yeah. Okay. So imagine this kind of fake history where you're telling people, oh, Muslims were great from the beginning, and they were so nice to Christians until those evil crusaders decided to do that. That's a premier example of fake history. And if I believe that, well, of course I'm going to believe Muslims are still being abused by those stupid white Christian colonialist people, et cetera, et cetera. But if I understand the truth, actually it was Muslims who were it's known the First Crusade is a belated rebuttal to centuries of Islamic conquest. And in fact, in the decades before the First Crusade, the atrocities had reached a new high, of attacks on Christians and pilgrims and destroying churches.
So you're saying that the Crusades, at least the first one, was a direct response to aggression on behalf of Muslims.
That's what the sources make very clear.
And what this was just part of we have to wage jihad, and so we're going to go out.
Yeah. It was always bad, of course. Under Christians had always been going to the Holy Land, even after the Islamic conquest. Mm-hmm. And depending on who was the leader, at least they would expect extra money and taxes. But if there were radicals or whatever, there'd always be uprisings. And even when pilgrims would get there, they'd get killed, raped.
Were they going just to see the Holy Land and pay tribute, like find the rock that Jesus came out from behind?
Pilgrimage was a huge thing in Europe.
But they weren't trying to take it over.
No. Just pilgrimage to go worship at the holy sites.
Okay. And so they basically now, every time they go, there's some sort of ultra-violent aggro.
The Turks, the Seljuk Turks specifically, had risen right around this time, and they were engaged in all sorts of horrific. I describe it in one of my chapters in Sword of Scimitar, where in one city, they burned 1,000. It was known as the Church of it was a city of 1,001 churches. They burned them all to the ground. It was an Armenian city. And they would pull out the entrails of people. Rape women on the altars, including nuns. All right, so that sort of thing. But how many people know this if you hear the First Crusade? No, the First Crusade was a colonial racist venture. No, it was actually trying to redress all these wrongs and put an end to them. Okay, so this is what I mean. This context is important, and if you don't have that, you have fake history, which will feed into all of these ideas, which is white man bad, Muslim innocent. But if you have at least some balance, you have the truth. Okay, well at least it could still be whatever it is today, but at least you have a solid, accurate foundation to understand it through.
Okay. So through all that history, and you've mentioned Spain a little bit, but it's probably worth walking us through that timeline. I think you said it went on for like 700 or 800 years. Walk us through that timeline. I want people to understand the pattern that you see emerging as you look at this, because I think it will speak directly to what you see now and how people should interpret that. So as we take Muslim behavior over, hundreds of years, 1,000 years, I think you document up to 1,400 years certainly in Sword and Scimitar. What pattern emerges?
The Spanish example is a good one because it's really a microcosm of everything we're talking about. You can see that Spain was almost like, Europe, but it was it's a peninsula. It's not little. Islam invades in the year 711 is the year given and essentially conquers it. Except for a very small group of rebels who get holed up in these Asturian mountains in the northwestern quadrant of the peninsula. And the Muslim sources say whatever, they're like 10 people living in a rock. Who cares? Slowly, these and the rest of the Christians, and there were Jews there as well, had become subjugated by the Muslims at this point. Okay, so now they're paying the tributes dhimmis, exactly. Slowly, decade after decade, century after century, the Christians in the north starts coming down, and this is the Reconquista, the main traditional,
And this literally takes hundreds of years.
Well, okay, so the conquest is 711, and it doesn't end until 1492.
Whoa.
Yeah. Okay. So this is how it starts. And you can look at the map and, the Christians slowly keep coming on. And then there's vicissitudes. Muslims win more land and Christians win more land, and it keeps going on and on. It's by and large, it's almost over by the mid 1250s. But you have Granada in the very southern tip, and that's still a Muslim kingdom until 1492. Okay, so when you look at that, it's funny to me because, again, here we go with the fake histories. A lot of historians have tried to say, actually, this was a great time of cooperation, and you had Muslims, Jews, and Christians living in peace and in harmony. And here's the thing, okay, we just said this is centuries. If you look at it, they're basically talking about maybe a decade in those centuries, where all it was is grand architecture and yes, and in that context, more progressive scientifically than the rest of Dark Age Europe. Okay, but even in that you find inconvenient hiccups. So there's, for example, something called the Martyrs of Cordoba, and this is around, I want to say, 850. This would fall within the timeline of the Golden Age that supposedly the Christians and Jews and Muslims have. But the Martyrs of Cordoba were basically Christians who had been dhimmis, and they had reached the point where they just got tired of, even though they're paying their tribute and they can be Christians, of being pressured, because that was always an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing thing today, where you're mocked for being a Christian, for example, and they got tired of it, that they started just speaking up real loud and blaspheming, essentially, by saying your prophet is a false prophet, Muhammad. There's only one God, Jesus Christ, etc. And they were all they're known as the Martyrs of Cordoba. There were something like 50. They were all beheaded, boiled in oil, crucified, skinned alive, including women. Okay, so that's the Golden Age. All right, just to give you an idea. Outside of that was just pure carnage, nonstop. Christians, Muslims fighting back. In the Christian mentality, where it's Reconquista, we're reconquering our land, because Muslims did conquer. It was a Christian territory when the Muslims invaded. And that goes on and on and on. And then you have the pivotal moment, which I think I touched on, is about Taqiyya. So this is actually a perfect example of the Taqiyya. Now you have Spain, the Christians have conquered all of Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula. This, of course, includes Portugal. A lot of Portuguese people get upset when I just keep saying Spain. So, Spain and Portugal. And now you have Islam is confined to Granada. It's something like 500,000 people. Initially, the Spaniards, they after they conquered them in 1492, they said, you can stay Muslim, you can practice Sharia, do your thing. This is the part people don't hear. And what happened is, all of a sudden, a lot of those Muslims were trying to subvert Spain back. They were helping the Barbary Muslim pirates raid. They were trying to ally with the Ottoman Turks, fellow Muslims again. And before long, the Christians just finally understood, okay, your religion is inherently is incompatible. So they said, sorry, you have two choices now. You either become a Christian or you leave. Go back to North Africa, whence they had come in the 8th century. And now the common day rendering is this. First of all, no one's going to tell you that they were given freedom originally and that they were trying to subvert Spain back to Islam. Mm-hmm. And they're going to tell you just randomly Christians, because they're crazy, evil, bigoted Catholics, decided they can't live in peace, and they said, Muslims, you have to become Christians, okay? No, it was done because in the context of the times, it was understood that, first of all, there's no atheism in this period. You're going to be one religion or another. And if you're a Muslim, and we already know, at this point they've translated, they understand the Quran, they're saying what I'm saying about these doctrines. And so, okay, either you become like us, in which case we assume you're going to stop hating and trying to kill us. Okay, at least the further, your second generations and third, or you leave. So all of a sudden they all converted, 500,000. Okay, and then later on we find out that they got fatwas. Okay, fatwa is an Islamic decree from a jurist, a high-ranked scholar, and several of them. And they said, now you can do Taqiyya. And Taqiyya is, okay, you can convert, you can become Christians, you can have the Eucharist, you can go to Mass, you can do the whole 9 yards. But as long as in your heart, you're still a Muslim and you're still trying to help Islam, okay, it's fine. And they all converted. Okay, and now why I find it amusing, because if you look at the records, as I have, and I talk about it a little bit in Sword and Scimitar, the Christians just couldn't believe it. And there's one who's like, these people, it was for generations, they acted like model Christians, better than us, the native Spaniards and Portuguese. And then we found they would go to church and all that. And then we'd find they were at home, as I told you, preaching jihad and teaching their children how they have to hate and etc. And that's what gave rise to the Inquisition, at least in Spain, because you had all this huge mass, and a lot of the Muslims were saying, no, I'm a good Christian, and some were being busted for, doing Taqiyya. That's what led to the Inquisition. I'm not necessarily justifying it. I'm just giving you an idea, because the Ponty Python kind of version, which unfortunately too many people believe, is, oh no, they're just crazy, evil Christians and Catholics, and they just don't believe in tolerance and religious freedom, and they decided we're going to torture everyone until they become Christian. No, as you can see, there's a deeper context, there's a deeper story to it. And then in the end, the Spaniard just said, you know what, we can't figure it out. This is too hard. Everyone has to go. And so they were all expelled. And now the irony is, you find out today Spain just brought like 1 million migrants from Africa who just walked in and they just gave them free citizenship. Okay, and so it's interesting because, and a lot of those migrants, you find that they engage in the same sorts of behavior. They have that, at least that tribalistic. They don't have to be sophisticated and theologically understood or learned in Islam, but that old tribalism is just there. It's human. Okay, and they go there and they prey on whatever, and they destroy and they exploit the Somalis, here in Minnesota, that mentality. Okay. So, so the continuum continues with Islam, but the West has had a massive break and it just doesn't learn from its history, and it's just repeating it and going out of its way, which is why all these countries, which is why the West today, Europe, is so much more powerful than Islam, military, technologically, economically. I mean, it could destroy it. If the West was governed by Genghis Khan, he could destroy Islam, right?
Yeah,
physically.
I would say, given what he's known for.
And yet, at no time Europe, for the longest time before the colonial era, was the weak horse. Islam was the behemoth surrounding it. Okay, that's how it was understood. So it's ironic that those Europeans fought tooth and nail to preserve their way of life. Right. And today you have this sort of decadent West, which is all powerful. And it's doing everything to kill itself and bring in people who don't share its values, don't share its worldview, are not assimilating, openly so. And so I guess that's the long version to answer your, what's the warning?
Okay, so we have this pattern that we see repeating through history. We just had Spain let in. They originally claimed it was 500,000.
That was like 1.3 million or something.
Like wild number.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the guy says, so we can, I forget the phraseology, but he was basically saying, so you guys can become citizens and outvote the right.
Yeah.
Like something to the effect that I want you guys to get the voting so you can vote for us and we can keep doing this and shut down the right.
Yeah, you'll get to one of my can of worms, so we'll set that aside for a second. What's going to be the consequence of this? How does this play out across Europe? I'm watching what's happening in the UK, which, because my wife is British, I'm very, very close to that problem. Obviously, what Spain is doing is pretty wild. You look at Brussels, and it's crazy. And a lot of people will say, it's not really that big of a number. I'm not sure what people are talking about. But as you sort of run the scenario to bring up Peter Boghossian again, he is saying that he believes that Europe is already dead, that from a demographic position, the certainty of their demise, just from what part of the population they make up in their own country, is so already done that he, with a straight face, believes that they should negotiate basically a surrender. Yeah. I don't think I'm misrepresenting his position.
No, you're not. He's said that to me numerous times.
Yes. So because he's saying, like, we'll get abused down the road as they take over the country, so we might as well negotiate it now so we can basically limit the abuse that we'll face in the future. It's pretty wild. Like,
I always hope he's like playing devil's advocate.
He does not seem to be, though. It would be very interesting to get him on the show to have a similar walkthrough of his belief system that leads him to this conclusion. The thing that made the cameraman walk off was he said, in reference, I believe, to UK, but certainly Western Europe. Western Europe, he said over and over and over. In Western Europe, if they can't find another solution, they have to start shooting people that come over the border illegally. He's very clear about that. This is about illegal immigration in Western Europe. I believe I've accurately represented his statements. But that's pretty wild. So he obviously has a set of beliefs about what the second and third order consequences of this are going to be as they play out over time. You chuckled here when I mentioned his belief. You seemed almost incredulous in a very kind way, but you seemed very shocked by what he was saying. So what's your take? Like, what happens to Spain? What happens to the UK as this plays out?
I think one of the fundamental problems is Western people specifically are myopic and they just see the now. And that's why they look at the now and it's like, what's a big deal? 5%, 10% Muslims. We'll figure it out later. And the thing is, it's like a slippery slope because it keeps growing and growing, and the more it grows, for some reason, it seems like their freedoms, the Brits, for example, starts eroding because they can't see and speak about what's happening. And so my point is, I don't think it's too late, and a lot of people think I do. I don't, but I think it's a lot harder than you think. It's not. This isn't where I'm going to vote for this guy and now we're going to get it done. I think that's the problem. A lot of people pin all their hopes on one politician, thinking this guy's going to do a miracle. And the problem is, the whole culture needs to change. It's a paradigm shift. Okay, if you want to actually make a change, it's not just you can't. Here's the thing: you can't be who you are today and just single out Islam and say bye. The reason Islam is becoming a problem, even though it's inherently weak more than ever, and you're inherently strong, is because of so many of the sort of philosophies that the Western epistemology has absorbed. Okay, and that's what's allowing this. So I believe it's going to take an actual serious paradigm shift. It's not just we're going to create one or two policies which will take care of it. I drew, for example, an analogy. Rupert Lowe. Yep. And what he's saying, and what he's saying, how can I go against it? I mean, this is a man who cares about his country, his people, and he sees what's going on. Okay, makes sense. A lot of people like that. But he's saying things like, not only are we going to stop migration, we're going to reverse it. And if you don't like our way of life, you're going to leave. And a lot of people I've heard tell me things like, yeah, we've had it with Islam. We want them all out. Okay, now here's the thing. Stopping migration itself seems so hard for a lot of these countries.
Just culturally, there's not the will.
Yeah. I mean, look at here, the United States. Okay, it's, you can say what you want to say, but as I understand it, ICE, and I haven't followed it, so maybe, but my point is, you're an illegal alien, you don't belong here, and it's supposedly, as I understand it, they're going after criminal elements. That if you can't get behind that, you think the UK, which is even more liberal than America, is going to get behind kicking Muslims out of their country who've been there for years. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's not as easy as, people can talk the talk, but actually implementing these policies. And even if you stopped all the immigration, these Muslim countries, I've already told you, for example, a Pew poll or a Pew report said that by 2050, Germany is set to be 20% Muslim. And that's if migration stops.
Whoa.
Which it hasn't. Okay. So I think that's what I mean by the myopia, where again, Muslims are lockstep in keeping with the continuum of their history, which sometimes you have massive takeovers. Sometimes it's slow. And I think it's very important to understand something which might help you and your audience, which is when I talk about Muslims the way I do, I think it sounds like, man, you're really demonizing them and they're these evil people. And it's, that's not right. I mean, people are people. And the thing is, they don't see themselves as evil. And I'm not even saying they're evil. My point is, they always see themselves as the good guy, even when they're doing the jihad and killing and lying, because Islam is right. Islam is good. You people are pathetic infidels. Look at the way you live.
It's what God wants.
And we are helping bring it in any which way we can. The ends justify the means. In their mind, they're good. So they're not demoralized in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
You were talking about sort of, it's their time. Yeah, that's how they see it. And they're doing what they're doing, whereas the West is so utterly demoralized and, so defeatist, so just going out of its way, essentially, to make itself extinct by going out of its way. I mean, what kind of society, you look at the UK, for example, allows Muslims to come in waving ISIS flags, but then if you're an actual Brit waving, I don't know, a St. George flag,
you get crazy.
Isn't it? Think about it. That's surreal to me, and that's the problem.
I didn't even let you finish the sentence. You get in trouble for waving the British flag. Yeah. That's wild.
That is, to me, the problem. It's not the Muslims. I say this often, by the way. The Muslims aren't the issue because you know what? They're not coming with swords and spears like they used to, and Europeans had to fight them. People always say, "Oh, the UK is being invaded." No, they're not being invaded. They're being invited. You're inviting them. This is your problem. You're doing this to yourselves. And I think people need to understand that it's a much easier message and more comforting to just, Muslims are evil and I hate them and whine about it. And it's more, I think, realistic to just be kind of like whatever you think about Islam. It's you guys who are doing this. You can look at a country like Hungary or Poland. They don't put up with this. They put up little fences and they have no more problems. Okay. And then Hungary and Poland are not a superpower compared to France and England, okay, or the UK. So I think a lot of people need to understand that it is a problem and it is getting worse. And a lot of it has to do with you, not you per se, but you as a society, as a culture. The Muslims, like you're pointing out, yeah, it's my time. I believe in it. I'm bringing good stuff, and they're propelled by that. But it's kind of like if you don't have anything, if you have no cultural or any religion or heritage that you feel is behind your civilization, then yeah, you'll just be like an open vacuum and something else is going to fill it.
Okay, so if we're in a position where you've got the UK is inviting people in, we've got this historical pattern that repeats. We're worried about that historical pattern because it tends to be when we're weak, we're essentially tolerant. When we get strong, we then start forcing our religion on other people. I get that. And let's say that it played out that way if nothing was done about it. Why, instead of a Rupert Lowe and trying to reverse immigration and sending everybody back, why aren't we really looking at the community, the Muslim community, and saying, you guys need an enlightenment? Now, I know Sam Harris had really, I think, tried to go down that road. That always resonated with me. Why can't Islam, or maybe you think it can, but can Islam have an enlightenment and truly reform itself?
Well, the way I'm hearing it is sort of ironic because you or Sam Harris, Muslims don't care what you think. And for you to come tell them you need an enlightenment, you're the enemy. You're the de facto enemy. I already told you. You're the infidel. So am I. So forget about us telling them anything about an enlightenment. Now, if it organically can develop from Muslims themselves, that's where it would have to come, of course. So basically, what I think is, first of all, when it comes to the word reform, and here again we go with this, I think what's going on is Western projection. They think of the Reformation, which of course is seen as a good thing because most Westerners are Protestants, okay, so what was the Reformation? Mechanically, what happened? Technically, what happened is, you can say, it goes around the idea of sola scriptura, right? Which is we're done with clergy and hierarchies in the church and popery, as it was called, and we're just going to go with the Bible, okay?
So it's me having a direct relationship with the Bible.
Yeah, it's and that. And then when that happened, okay, well, especially as you were saying, and you look at the New Testament, which for Christians, of course, is more important. This is the actual meaning, right? You find a lot of positive, passive, non-hate-filled, et cetera, okay? Now, the interesting thing is, and I've said this before, something akin to that Reformation is actually already happening in the Islamic world, but it's leading to almost a more radicalization because the texts are so different. So I'll explain. Islam historically, most Muslims, like most Europeans, were illiterate. No one had owned a Quran. It was just the leaders who maybe could read it, or actually mostly they would recite it. They memorized it by route. And so, you had I told you, the scholars, they were a major role of articulating Islam, okay? Now, when you move to the modern, or like, let's say now and for last century, the Quran, Muslims are much more literate. The Quran is now available. It's being translated in many languages. It's on the internet. Even more telling is the entire corpus of the hadith, which is massive. The hadith is the recordings of what Muhammad said and did, which is part of Islamic law, depending.
So we've got the writing, and then we've got the speaking.
It's all there at everyone's fingertip. Okay, so it's almost like the Protestant thing in that, okay, the Bible is now accessible. It's been translated. But it's leading to more radicalization because if you're a regular Muslim and you look at some of these texts and it says things like Muhammad saying, kill the apostate, kill the blasphemer, wage war on the Christian, subjugate them, that is prone to leading to more radicalization. Whereas historically, yeah, that was part of the corpus, but the scholars put it in a way. I mean, the hostility was there and the war on the infidel was part of it, but it was a little more systematized and a little more pragmatic. Okay. Whereas now you have just, and this is so to me, the rise of radical Muslims, as they're called, they are the Muslim Protestants in the sense that they just don't listen to any particular cleric. They read and they access the text themselves. And as it happens, so how can you have the same methodology, which is people going sola scriptura, but to their text, and yet one religion comes out good and one comes out bad? And this is hard for the relativistic mindset to understand, but it's because the texts are very different. The bottom line is, forget about Reformation in Islam. Now, enlightenment, that's possible. But what an enlightenment means is just kind of like, all right, we've lost faith in this religion, but we're just going to keep it as an outer trapping because it's part of our culture. And is that possible? Maybe. Sure. I mean, yeah, if Muslims collectively can do that, I suppose. But I don't see that happening right now or at any time. And again, one of the reasons is because Muslims are pragmatic, and when their religion is perceived as helping empower them, they like it. When it was seen during the colonial era as some backward relic, I was watching a video, for example, of Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian president in the 50s, and, suit and tie like everyone else. And he makes in one video, it's in Arabic, he mocks the hijab, what women wear. And everyone laughs about it. You go to Egypt now, every woman is in a hijab. So why was he and the Egyptians like that in the 50s and all throughout the early 20th century and in the late 19th century? It was because they were emulating the European colonizers, who were seen as the strong horse. And hey, we want to be like that. We want to have what they have. We want to. When I told you about Ataturk, he's the paradigmatic example of Turkey. Turkey went from, like I was telling you, really the jihadist scourge of Europe, to being the first Muslim country to get rid of it all and actually do everything possible to be Westernized. Why? Because it still had the same impetus of wanting to be powerful, but Islam had failed at this point. So now let's do what they're doing. But in as much as the West lost its confidence, and now all it has is just technology and the material, so too has it pushed Muslims back, rightfully so, or at least logically so, to their own heritage.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, spinning that off into something really tangible, have you ever thought about just the raw difference in outcomes that you're going to get if you tell people to emulate Jesus and if you tell them to emulate Muhammad, who, if I remember correctly, Muhammad had a sword, what is it, a sitar?
Scimitar, yeah.
Scimitar that was named like splitter of vertebrae or something like that.
Yeah.
And
good for you.
When I was reading that, I was like, yo, like that. So Jesus has like all this soft vibes. Like, I'm here to be kind to prostitutes and tip over the money makers and help the poor people and wash feet and forgive the guy that betrayed me. And the other guy has a battle sword called the splitter of vertebrae. And it's like, damn, I get why some people might be like, well, hold on, that feels pretty dope. I've been looked down on, I'm low class, whatever. I want to rock with the guy that's got the splitter of vertebrae.
And this is actually why, this is a whole deep topic. This is actually part of this book. But the Jesus, the way you characterize him, which is the way most Americans and Christians even characterize it. I take some umbrage with that characterization. Not that you're wrong to say that. Of course, Jesus is not Muhammad. But there is, I think, if you will, I don't know if I want a militant side, even to Christianity, not necessarily physical, not war, but assertive, muscular Christianity, which I'm a firm believer and a promoter of. That's what this book was about, The Two Swords of Christ, which is the military orders. If you look at these guys and how they understood Christianity, it will blow your mind. But they use the same Bible and they use the same verses. It's called two swords because, for example, Jesus said in one of the verses in Luke, maybe you know it, where he says, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. And his disciples say, Lord, look, here are two swords. They found two swords. He said, that's enough. So to your modern day Christian who would go by the description you gave of Christ, that means nothing. Okay. So today, if you ask an interpreter, what does that mean? Well, it means nothing. He's just being parabolic or whatever. To the early Christians, especially medieval Christians, what he was saying is there's two enemies in this world. One is a spiritual enemy, and you need a spiritual sword, which modern day Christians, I think, would agree. The other one was a secular, material enemy, and you need a secular sword. Okay, which would be, for example, the military arm of a society. And that's how actually it was understood. So my point is, and I want to tie this to Islam because that's what we're talking about and what you just said. But my point is, in many ways, Christianity has been emasculated and effeminized from what it was. It wasn't always like this. People want to think that, there's a reason crusaders could have existed and could have been so ferocious and violent and yet be more pious, believe it or not, they were dying for their faith than people today. And so now let's go back to what you're saying where, I can see why a person would find the Muhammad vertebrae sword kind of appealing as opposed to, I call it doormat Christianity, this idea that, Christianity is just, I'm your doormat. Come wipe your feet on me and I'll do nothing. And a lot of Western men are are losing their Christianity, and even some are converting to Islam because they find that sort of militant, muscular, masculine side appealing. So on the one hand, what I'm trying to say is there is that problem going on today in Western nations in how Christianity is understood. And I'm not trying to say Christianity has jihad but there is just war. Okay, that was something that was always a long time ago articulated. No one had problems with it. But today it seems to be a lot of modern Christians and just Western people in general don't believe that you can't be in any way, shape, or form violent ever. That was not at all the way they understood it. And in as much as Westerners and Christians feel that way, it's only natural a lot of men are just dropping out of Christianity. And it's even more natural that a lot of them, the Andrew Tate phenomena, where they're gravitating towards Islam because it's seen as a patriarchal kind of masculine religion. So it's kind of unfortunate because Christianity that's what chivalry was. Chivalry was, masculinity is there, but we're going to tame it and use it for righteous causes. But without it, things go willy-nilly and you can end up with a really toxic kind of masculinity.
Now, do you think that Western culture at large needs to draw a line, find that more masculine version of itself to have a new reformation where we begin reinterpreting some of the verses in a way that say basically be strong, be able to wield the sword but keep it sheathed, so that we can draw a line and say, listen, this is our culture and leave it alone?
But I wouldn't call it reinterpreting. I would say it would be reclaiming. I mean, that is the historic past of Christianity. So it's not new. It's just been forgotten and jettisoned, demonized perhaps. But yeah, it's good because it's used solely for defense. No Christian, I'm not saying Christianity should go on the offense, but yeah, you defend your world, your civilization, your people, your family. Okay. And, this goes back to illegals jumping over, fences and whatever. Christianity, there's a reason most Christian nations up until now in the United States will agree capital punishment. So I think the idea of the problem is just too many people have come to believe that Christianity begins and ends with literally being a doormat. And that actually feeds into these problems that we're talking about, even if you're not Christian. The bottom line is if you're not Christian, if you're an atheist, if you're born, and you kind of hinted at this, if you're born and raised in this Western milieu, you are a Christian despite yourself. Forget about the theology, forget about the veneer and saying I believe in Jesus and that sort of thing. You are made and forged by centuries of Christianity. And to me, that's the more solid thing that we're really talking about. And when people don't realize that, and they say, no, or like secular Western Europe has nothing to do with Christianity. Everything, all the things that atheists and seculars prize is inconceivable without Christianity. Why did it come from Europe? Humanism, the everything we talk about, tolerance and mercy, that didn't come from Confucius China, it didn't come from Islam, didn't come from Hinduism. Okay, there's a reason it happened in Europe. And it's not people. Again, the fake history is like it rose. It rose in Europe in defiance or against Christianity. No, Christianity was the seeds, because if it was a matter of defiance, well, it could have risen in the Middle East against defiance against Islam. It could have risen anywhere. So I think people need to understand that I personally am not very much interested in going and telling people what to believe theologically. But I do believe Christianity as a civilizational cultural force is something not to be ignored and just discarded, because without you knowing it, it is really the bedrock of everything we all like and we all love and we want to preserve.
All right. All the stuff that we've talked about today, how much of your interpretation of what is happening, what should happen in the future is predicated on your belief that Christianity is the word of God and ought to be the way that somebody lives?
I'll tell you this, that a lot of people think I'm like a hardcore Christian. I'm really not. And it's probably because I write these books, which deal with Christianity. I see myself more as a civilizational Christian, okay? Not the spiritual Christian. This doesn't mean I don't have a spiritual life. I'm just saying that to me is more important. But what I'll tell you is this, that with me, if anything brought me back to religion, it's my objective study of history and what I'm seeing around us today. They are actually constantly validating the truths of Christianity. It's not vice versa. I think most people approach it differently. They read the Bible, they memorize verses or theological doctrines, and they project it on what's happening. I'm the opposite. I looked at it secularly, okay? And I accepted it like that. But then the more I look at it, the more it keeps converging and coming back to these issues about Christianity. I'll leave you with a final anecdote, which is going to amuse you, okay? So in my field, again, to show you how some of these things that seem laughable, these Christian teachings or ideas that are superstitious and how they come back to haunt us. So in the 7th century, we talked about the Arab conquest of Christian lands. And amongst historians today, until now, it's seen as one of the great mysteries of history, because at the time, the Arabs, 7th century, they are just an impoverished, they're described even in their own sources as half naked, no weapons, just no sophistication whatsoever. And then you have the Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, which is still very powerful. And you have which is a superpower in the 7th century. And then you have the Persians also, which is another superpower. And so the mystery is, how did these Bedouins all of a sudden overrun both of them and conquer all the land that I told you? So not only Persia, but all of, Christian Syria, Greater Syria, and all of North Africa and all of Spain. That was always a mystery until now. And there's all kinds of theories that historians give, but they're just conjectural. Now, what's funny to me, and I know your audiences, I don't know if they're not going to like this, but okay, they'll get a kick out of it maybe. What's funny to me is that if you look at what the Christians said of the time, how did they rationalize this? They said God was punishing us for our sins. Okay. Now, I've read that in college. I wrote my thesis about, the Islamic conquest. And like your average historian, I was like, okay, whatever. Obviously, that's not the case. Okay, that's not why it really happened. And the one key text that every Christian would quote, and it was written about 690. Okay, so this is the height of the Islamic conquest. Almost all of North Africa is now conquered, and the Middle East, and it's on the verge of going in Spain. It's known as the Apocalypse. And it was written in Syriac. And the whole thing is, God is punishing us because of sexual immorality, because men are dressing like women, women are dressing like men, believe it or not.
That's wild.
No, but watch, it gets more interesting. And this is why, okay, so that's what it said. And that text kept circulating. And in 1683, a millennium later, when Muslims were besieging Vienna, they were reproducing and publishing and disseminating it so people understand why this is happening, because we've sinned again, and sexually, immorally. Now, why I bring this up and I find it interesting is look at the conversation we're having about Islam in Europe. Islam is weaker than it's ever. Okay, so if the Muslims, the big mystery of the 7th century is the Muslims are a lot weaker and they beat the Romans. Let's say they were, 10 times weaker at the time. Today, as we've just pointed out, militarily, economically, technologically, Europe's 1,000 times stronger than the Muslim world? Okay. And yet, isn't it interesting that Muslims are such a thorn, such a problem, taking over Europe and whatnot? And at the same time, there's people pointing out that, if it was because of cross-dressing and sexual immorality, I think there's a lot more of that today. So this is an example of me telling you, I read that. That didn't convince me. But now I'm watching reality unfold in front of me. And like, yeah, things are starting to make more sense in a way.
But do you think that...
So to answer your original question, it's not that my Christianity colors the way. It's actually what I'm seeing kind of makes me, validates Christianity for me.
Interesting. Let me see if I understand that. So there's two ways to interpret that beat. If you look at it as this is a thing that repeats throughout history, that there are these times where we let go of conservatism, perhaps is the right way to say it, around sexual mores, that there's like gender bending. And so men are very comfortable being effeminate, women are very comfortable being masculine, and that sort of sweeps, whether it went all the way to where we're at now, where, it's a trans phenomenon up in the air. But so way number one would be that when a culture starts to do that, God actually punishes you. Way number two is that happens at a time where your culture becomes too pluripotent. What I mean by that is when you take a stem cell and you have a like skin cell, let's say, and you want to make it pluripotent so it could become anything again, you run the risk of de-differentiating to the point where the integrity of the cell begins to fall apart. So you have to be careful not to turn a cell like that into a cancer cell that just divides infinitely. Aging is supposedly when the cells in your body are de-differentiating. So an eye cell is also sort of a heart cell, also sort of a skin cell. And so you lose the distinctions in a society that we have to sort of force on people. And your society gets to a point, I believe, because you've had prosperity for so long, you haven't been challenged. The thing that I always tell people is we need to be chased by a lion. Like we need a difficulty. Yeah. We need a threat that forces us to have structure, to say yes to this, no to that. And when you have prosperity for too long, you begin to lose that. Success seems like a natural law of order. And so you just sort of let anything go, and you're not forcing people to be disciplined, to work hard, to stay focused, reward meritocracy, et cetera, et cetera. And so almost as a physics response to prolonged prosperity, we find ourselves in this de-differentiated state. And then whoever is hyper-differentiated believes in their culture, has conviction to say, nope, you guys are stupid. We're going to come in and take over. That's why those two things may happen at the same time. Are you saying it's God just doesn't like it, so I'm going to send an army to take you down? Or do you think that this is like what I was saying, where it just sort of is a thing that corresponds with a problem within society?
I think it could be both. Okay, and I only brought the God thing up because you asked me directly, like how my faith fits into this. And I was trying to give you an example that it's not so much that I approach it thinking about theology. It's rather I didn't think about theology, but then by looking at it, it actually makes me wonder. So I actually didn't even finish my idea. What I was trying to say is, so in the 7th century, the Arabs did what they did, and they said Christians said it was sexual immorality, and the Muslims or Arabs were 10 times weaker than Rome. So how did that happen? That's why it's a mystery for us. I believe, a century from now, 2 centuries from now, 3 centuries from now, the posterity will look, and let's say Muslims do overrun Europe, and they're going to be like, how did this? That is going to be much greater mystery. That how did these guys who were so weak, their countries, migrants coming cap in hand, poor, and Europe was so powerful. So that will be one of those amazing mysteries, okay, where people will again be trying to come up with conjectures. So now put that aside. I'm just trying to show you that it's not that my religion guides me. It's if anything, it's history is making me believe more in religion. But now what you said, of course, that's also just as plausible. Okay, which is you don't have to give it a theological explanation. Okay, it could be just okay. Well, what's that saying? Like strong men create strong societies, and then strong societies create weak men, and weak men create weak societies, etc. So it's a cycle that definitely makes sense. And and whoever has the eye of the tiger, if it's the Muslims, they're going to want it more. So, of course, I'm not discounting that either. Ultimately, I was just trying to answer your question about me and my religious lens to show you that, if anything, it's studying history and current events that actually makes me look back and go, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense now, not vice versa, where I'm forcibly applying theology, which people do, by the way. And I don't care for that.
Okay, for a moderate Muslim who's watched this whole thing, they're with us still, and they have parsed all this, but they feel directly attacked by your philosophies, what would you want to say to them?
If this is a truly moderate Muslim, they shouldn't feel attacked, and I think they should agree with me because they should know, again, I've not attacked any particular Muslim by saying, you are this. I've talked about a body of beliefs and religion, Islam. Any so-called moderate Muslim, I can't, if they were to say, oh no, you're wrong about the history or you're wrong about Muhammad saying kill the apostate, that's your books. Most of this is from Muslim books that I'm telling you, including the history. So if they're really genuinely moderate, I think they would agree with me and say, yeah, you're right, but I'm moderate for whatever reason. I've rationalized it this way. If they actually attack me, then that's the Taqiyya Muslim. That's the one who's, playing that little game and saying, no, Islam is peace and this guy's a liar. And I've met a lot of, a lot of Muslims who, if you want to call them moderate, what they are is they're secular Muslims. They're nominal Muslims, cultural Muslims. And they don't want to break away because that's their heritage and there's a sense of loyalty and kinship to their people. That's it. But they're not necessarily reading the Quran or believing in any of that sort of thing. And those people, I would imagine, if they heard me, if they know anything about Islam, they would agree quietly, secretly to themselves. So I don't think that should draw any ire from them towards me.
All right, man, this has been incredible. Where can people follow along with you?
Thanks. Well, my website, I have, so my books, you can get them. They're on my website. They're on Amazon. I suggest if anyone's interested in this particular topic, Sword and Scimitar, which this is the third of a trilogy. The first one is Sword and Scimitar, and they like that, they can pursue them. But that one gives you really the general introduction to the overall history that I barely touched on between Islam and the West. And then I also have a Substack, which people can just look up with my name, and my YouTube channel is out there as well.
What's
under my
YouTube
name.
Channel?
I think it's just my name, but it's called the Holy War channel because I talk about crusades and jihads.
Nice. I love it. As somebody who's watched a lot of your content, I highly recommend people check it out.
I appreciate that.
All right, boys and girls, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more. Of the 47 nations in Europe, all 47 require government-issued photo ID to vote. India, a country where 63% of the population live in rural areas and where hundreds of millions